Hello, BookTube. This is Mike Frost, the postmodernist poetry prognosticator, here to say hello and to wish Lawrence Ferlinghetti a happy 100th birthday. I was inspired to do this video by another booktuber, Beth over at Read Remark, who's prettier and smarter than I am, and beat me to this happy birthday to Lawrence Ferlinghetti, a very important American poet. But I thought I would add to her remarks, and I'm going to link her video below. She does a remarkable job with this. But I thought I would add my 2 cents to the happy birthday that she wishes Lawrence Ferlinghetti. For those that may not know about Lawrence Ferlinghetti, he's very much associated with the beat poets, although he does not consider himself a beat poet. But he was born in Yonkers, New York in 1919, March 24th, 1919. He was raised there. He went to school there, got a BA in journalism, started out as a sports journalist. So you're just your average young man out of Yonkers. Got into the Navy for World War II. I think he was drafted, I'm not sure. But served in the Atlantic, and then he was transferred and served in the Pacific. And I'm not really sure of the details of this, but as I understand it, he was exposed to the aftermath of the atomic bombs that the Americans dropped on Japan in World War II. And his vision of that, his experience with that, made him an instant pacifist. He very shortly thereafter left the Navy, continued his education, got a BA in English in Columbia University, went over to Paris to study, continued studying, got his PhD over there, did a dissertation in cities as a symbol in modern poetry. And I talked a little bit about that in my last video about the modernists and their use of the city as a symbol. But I'll leave that to another day. Maybe we can talk more about that. But then returned to the United States, returned to New York, and then traveled across the United States to San Francisco. And a lot of his poetry, almost every one of his books of poetry, collections of poetry, as you see this traveling, he very much that influenced his poetry, the travel across the United States by land. And it's throughout all of his poetry. But he ends up in San Francisco, opens up a bookstore there called City Lights, a wonderful bookstore that's still there today. My wife and I used to live in Santa Barbara, California. We used to drive up to San Francisco just to go to City Lights bookstore and go over to Oakland and go to Serendipity bookstore. Great bookstores in the San Francisco, Oakland area. But anyway, he opened up that bookstore, and he came in contact and was very influenced by and influenced the Beat generation poets. In fact, his bookstore was also a publishing house called City Lights, and he published Allen Ginsberg's Howl, and he was arrested for that under obscenity laws, and went to court for free speech, and it was a landmark decision and a very important decision that transcends poetry and transcends writing into First Amendment rights, an extremely important case in which he fought for the First Amendment rights of Allen Ginsberg to publish Howl. So if you don't know him as a poet, you should at least know that if you're a booktuber and someone that loves books, that case in itself should make him on your map. But besides, now he never considered himself a beat poet, but he was certainly involved. He performed with the beat poets. He traveled with beat poets. He knew all the beat poets. All the beat poets knew him. But I would agree with him in a certain sense. There are quintessential beat poets that. When you think of beat poetry, you think of Allen Ginsberg, of course. When you think of beat poetry, that's Allen Ginsberg. Jack Kerouac, you think of as a beat writer, but also a beat poet. Neil Cassidy, I'm thinking of Gary Snyder. Some of these people are just the quintessential beat poets. And then there are some poets that started out as beat poets or were at one time considered beat poets, but then transcended, I think, beat poetry. Lawrence Ferlinghetti would be one of those poets. I'm also thinking of Amira Baraki, Diana de Prima, Anne Waldman. These are poets that were at one time or another associated with beat poetry, but I think their poetry transcended that simple nomenclature. I don't think you can just say that. I think you limit their readings too much by just saying that they're beat poets. They transcend any school of poetry, which I think makes them more important than just a simple school of poetry or a simple part of poetry. But Lawrence Ferlinghetti, when he was out in San Francisco, published several books. The one that he's most known for, and a classic for Lawrence Ferlinghetti, is Coney Island of the Mind. And if you're going to start with Lawrence Ferlinghetti, this is the book to start with. There are so many of these poems are my favorite of Lawrence. It's not my favorite book. Now I've got several of his books here that we could kind of go through, but this one is my favorite Lawrence Ferlinghetti book, A Time of Useful Consciousness. I'll talk a little bit more about that. But this is the classic Lawrence Ferlinghetti. And to give you a taste of, I'll read my favorite poem out of this book, but there's so many good poems in this book. But just to give you a taste of who Lawrence Ferlinghetti is as a poet, I'll read one of the shorter ones, but it's one of my favorites. It's called The World is a Beautiful Place, or it's numbered in this book as number 11, but when titled, it's often titled by the first line. The world is a beautiful place to be born into, if you don't mind happiness not always being so much fun. If you don't mind a touch of hell now and then, just when everything is fine, because even in heaven, they don't sing all the time. The world is a beautiful place to be born into, if you don't mind some people dying all the time, or maybe only starving some of the time, which isn't half so bad if it isn't you. Oh, the world is a beautiful place to be born into, if you don't mind much a few dead minds in the higher places, or a bomb or two now and then on your upturned face, or such other improprieties as our name-brand society is prey to, and its men of distinction and its men of extinction, and its priests and other patrolmen, and its various segregations and congressional investigations and other constipations that our fool flesh is heir to. Yes, the world is the best place of all for a lot of such things as making the fun scene, or making the love scene, or making the sad scene, or singing low songs and having inspirations and walking around looking at everything and smelling flowers and goosing statues and even thinking and kissing people and making babies and wearing pants and waving hats and dancing and going swimming in rivers on picnics in the middle of the summer and just generally living it up. Yes. But then right in the middle of it comes the smiling mortician. The World is a Beautiful Place by Lawrence Ferlinghetti, out of the Coney Island of the Mind, a classic for him. So that's a taste of Lawrence Ferlinghetti with the link below. And I'll link a few of his poetry readings below of some of my favorite poems. But if you listen to Beth and see some of her remarks on it, you will get a little bit more of Lawrence Ferlinghetti's style and his poetry. And just because it is my favorite, the Time of Useful Consciousness. Now, what that title, when I start reading, I always start with the title of a book. And just to give you an idea, this at the back, the note tells us, in quotes, time of useful consciousness is an aeronautical term denoting the time between when one loses oxygen and one passes out, the brief time in which some life-saving action is possible. That's where he gets his title from. It also says in here, this is in describing the book, it says it's a fragmented recording of the American stream of consciousness, which I agree with, in the traditional style of William Carlos Williams Patterson, which I don't agree with. It's nothing like Patterson. Charlie Olson's Maximus, okay. Allen Ginsberg, Fall of America, yes, spot on there. And Ed Sanders' American History in Verse, which, okay, I'll let you stretch it a little bit that way. But it is essentially a fragmented recording of the stream of consciousness and a history of America. So the first part of the book, because I recommend this one, if you get past the Coney Island of the Mind, this is classic, and you're going to pick up another book, this one would be the one I would say. So the first part is really an introduction. Look at a short part of this, like introduction, part one. In the hinter nation that stretches westward from Manhattan, autumn finds the people restless across the iron cities, cement plains, and stilted rivers, across Appalachia, across Ohio, first western frontier, and down into middle America, hinter America, by great lakes yearning, by firelands burning, red brick mansions moldering, down the wooded streets of 100 winded towns, under the huge sugar maples, down the canyons of dying leaves, each a hand letting go in full catastrophe, a full miracle of life. Homer heard it by the Aegean long ago, by the ocean's long withdrawing roar, the city of the voyager, always outward bound over bright horizons to new worlds, and then sinking home again, steering toward democracy, even as they plundered everywhere and took slaves wherever. We had our own town criers, Whitman, Melville, Emerson, Thoreau, Thomas Paine, and Mark Twain, and Thomas Wolfe with his destiny that leads to the soft stone smile of an angel, and lives haunted by the Georgian slaughter because a London cut purse went unhung, and Woody Guthrie, and Dylan, and Pete Seeger, and Johnny Cash, and Paul Robeson singing Joe Hill, the true popular poets of America, their voices moving everyone, more than the poets in books, the printed page having made them so silent. And so that's his opening lines of this book that fragmentedly gives a stream of consciousness of him, of traveling from the east to the west and through history. So just to give you an idea. So the part two opens up with, so that sailing westward from the creole old world of old age Cambrian Europe, millions washing up on virgin shores, bright with promise, awake and sing, ye who dwell in the dust. So he opens it with the founding of America, with the discovery. Oh, I hate that term, discovery of America. The people coming to America, and each section goes through a progression in history and a progression westward. It starts out with that promise, and then in places gets bleak. Lawrence Ferlinghetti isn't what I would call an eternal optimist, but toward the end, he gives a bleak outlook on current history, if you will. It's published in 2013, I think. And then he tells himself, enough of this loud lament of the discordant Khmer in some wasteland of our impoverished imagination. Did not Martin Luther King have a dream? And did he not opine that only when it's dark enough can you see the stars? So the last little bit is a more optimistic look. And he ends with Walt Whitman, one of the biggest influences on the Beat generation. It's not, Lawrence Ferlinghetti is influenced by the Beats. He performed with the Beats. He wrote with the Beats. But the Beats are very much influenced by Walt Whitman. Ferlinghetti gives me more of a modernist tone. If I can put this now, he's a populist, so he wants everybody to understand poetry. But I hear in his poetry, I sense in his poetry, a T.S. Eliot influence, a modernist influence from works of T.S. Eliot that I don't hear in Ginsberg, that I don't hear in Snyder, that I don't hear in Kerouac. You definitely hear Whitman in them, and you definitely hear Whitman in Lawrence Ferlinghetti. But I also hear, and I'm not collaborated on this by anybody that I know of, but I hear the influence of T.S. Eliot. Only minor, though. T.S. Eliot likes to add a lot of references that the general reader would not understand unless you start researching. You have to go to the footnotes. Lawrence Ferlinghetti is, like most of the Beats, he's a populist poet. Anybody that reads him, there's a lot of references. I think you've probably already heard several of them, references to other poets in poetry. but you don't have to be a scholar of poetry to understand him, and you don't have to get all the references to understand him. And I'll leave you with a little of his Walt Whitman. So this is how it ends. There's no spoiler alert in this. It's because it's stream of consciousness and it's fragmented. It doesn't matter where you jump into this thing. Walt Whitman, you should be living at this hour. Optimist of humanity in mass, old graybeard, old Walt stepping off Brooklyn Ferry into the heart of America. You who contained multitudes, you who heard America singing, you who sounded your barbaric yelp over the roofs of the world, you who said, I'll whimper no more out of the closet endlessly rocking, you who struck up for the new world, solitary, singing in the West. Where away now, dear poet, dear lover, eternal yea-sayer? So, that's Lawrence Ferlinghetti. If you get the Coney Island in mind, I'm going to link a few of his poems below. I'm certainly going to link Beth, who did a great video on this. And just to get you exposed, is he the great American poet? Is he the equivalent of Walt Whitman or Allen Ginsberg? I wouldn't think so, but extremely important poet. Of the people that are associated with the Beat Generation, Lawrence Ferlinghetti and probably Anne Waldman, two, I think, and Anna DePrima, Amira Baraki, these poets that transcend, I think, the Beat generation, are worth knowing, worth reading, and very enjoyable. I want poetry that I can just enjoy. And Lawrence Ferlinghetti is one of those poets. So I'll link to a few of his poems below. I would encourage you to at least check out Coney Island of the Mind. And if you enjoyed that, I would recommend A Time of Useful Consciousness, two of his best works, I think. And I anxiously await his Little Boy, the autobiographical novel, which I haven't read, but anticipate it's probably written in his fragmented style, although it's prose. I anticipate Lawrence Ferlinghetti at his best. With that, I leave you to the links below and wish you a well, BookTube. Have a great day.